Do you really need E911? I'm Mike Anderson. I'm the National Sales Director for 911 ETC. Kevin Keto is going to be presenting today, but just real quickly, a little bit of background on 911 ETC and who we are. 911 ETC has been providing E911 services now since 1997, and that's all that we do. That's what we were founded to do initially, and really where we shine is in helping our customers manage their 911 database into the appropriate either PS Alley databases or what we call a VPC database. We also now can route the 911 calls from a core PBX to external endpoints if needed as well. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Keto and let him kind of go through this presentation. And again, I appreciate everybody joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Mike. So just what exactly is E911? Just to make sure everybody is on the same page, what Enhanced 911 is just providing the correct location information of where the call is coming from when somebody dials 911. Back when I first started doing E911, it was really just a problem of, hey, let's make sure we get the right location information. Now it's kind of evolved into not only let's get the right location information to the 911 operator, but let's actually get that call routed to the correct place. Because now that people can throw phones out, it's remote offices, people can be working from home, or even on soft phones, the problems that have arisen with E911 have kind of exponentially grown over the years. Why should customers implement E911? Well, there's a number of different reasons. Ethically, number one, it's the right thing to do. You want to make sure your people are protected. Legally, there are different states across the country that have actually enacted specifically enhanced 911 legislation. There's about 18 states that currently have legislation, and there's a number of other states that are pending. And there's also some talk of maybe there being a national E911 legislation to be mandated by the FCC. And then the bottom line is risk management. You want to make sure that the potential liability that is involved if someone were to perish because of E911 not being in place, you want to make sure your organization is protected liably. Here's a map of some of the states that currently have E911 legislation. The ones in red are the ones that have actual E911 legislation. The ones in dark blue are the ones that have pending legislation. And then the ones in light blue have neither pending nor have any legislation in place. This is something that you can actually get on our website, 911etc.com/legislation. There you can go and actually click on a link to the specific states to check to see what your specific mandates are for your specific states. So why do customers actually implement E911? Unfortunately, this is what happens. Something really bad happens on a customer site. They find out, hey, we need to make sure that we have E911 covered. So I'm glad that a lot of you are on this call today because you're taking it hopefully a step before that, so that you're looking into E911 and saying, yeah, this is a concern, and you're taking it to maybe your management staff and saying, hey, we want to make sure that we're ahead of the curve rather than waiting for something bad to happen simply because we don't have enhanced 911 in place. So I have a multi-line telephone system. Do you really need to worry about E911? So let's go over some of the different risk assessments. The one we have at the top there, low risk. If you're a one address, one building, one floor, then really your E911 risk is pretty low because if you dial 911, the 911 operator is going to get the right address of where you're at, the building and floor. They don't really have to have a specific location other than just the address because they're going to find you in a timely manner. This is for organizations that are really small and they have a local trunk at that one particular site. So really, if you have that scenario, really you really don't have any risk at all as far as I'm concerned when it comes to E911 and making sure the right location information is getting to the 911 operator because you have that. And again, this could be, though, you could have some risk if the floor is really large. Say you have one address, one building, one floor, but that floor is an enormous floor. There could be some risk, but again, that risk is a little bit lower than as we get into the other one. The medium risk is a building with multiple floors, maybe multiple buildings on a campus, or even multiple addresses that are within the same county. And the reason that we say that this is more of a medium risk rather than getting into the high risk is because normally if the person can speak, the 911 operator can find out what floor there are. They'll believe the person when they say they're on the second floor in room 202, so they'll send police, fire, ambulance to that location. When you're talking about multiple buildings, you get in a little bit more of a risk because if the wrong address is displayed at the 911 operator's screen, they may end up sending people to a different address. And then you also get into even more risk when you're talking about multiple addresses in the same county, because they could, again, send the emergency responders to the incorrect address. We still say this is medium risk because at least the call is getting routed to the correct 911 center, or PSAP. And again, PSAP stands for Public Safety Answer Point, just a fancy name for where that call goes first. Then when we get into the high risk, when we start talking about IP mobility, where people can move within a building, or even from building to building, or from site to site, even going from one state to another state, logging in and out of a phone. Remote offices without local trunks. A lot of organizations are pulling voice traffic back to one core centralized location, and then just throwing IP phones out at remote offices and not giving them a local trunk. So that becomes another high risk. People working from home, people working on soft phones. So people could be on a laptop. They could literally be anywhere. They can get an internet connection. So they could be at a McDonald's in the morning, a Starbucks in the afternoon, and then maybe in a hotel room in the evening. And those are 3 different places. And how do you solve that problem with people just being able to access, dial 911 if they need help? And then FCE, the flat and consolidated extend model, taking that voice traffic back to one core location. So we'll go over we have a medium risk. Now what? One of the things, and this is actually not even specifically for enhanced 911, but you want to make sure that if somebody were to dial 911, would they be able to get out and be able to dial 911? But also, really important is to dial 911. There's been some problems with, there was a hotel in Texas where a lady was there, and they needed to get help to her. Her daughter dialed 911, and it didn't go out. The call didn't go out because she needed to dial 911. So this is really just a setting within your PBX you just need to address. And then is your current system configured to push out location information that is granular enough? And have you tested 911 with the appropriate public safety answer point? So again, going over that question of the access code. This is something that a lot of companies will actually disable 911 because there are so many misdials into it. If your access line or access code is 9, a lot of people will dial 9, and then they'll dial 1, and they'll look for the phone number, and then they'll dial 1 again. Well, then that call just goes out to 911, and it's just an accidental misdial where they're looking for a phone number and they kind of forgot that they dialed 911. So a lot of companies are disabling just 911 calls and requiring it to be 9911 or 9911. And this is something that could really be a detriment to a company. If somebody needs to dial 911 and they're not familiar with it, but you have to dial the access code, it can create a real problem. And again, this is just something that you need to talk to your PBX vendor about for assistance, and they can help you to configure this correctly. So next thing is, how granular are you giving information? Is it granular enough? Again, like I said before, there are some states that actually say, hey, you need to get it down to this square foot range. You need to get it down to a 7,000 square foot range or a 40,000 square foot range. But really, for my purposes, it's really more common sense, in my opinion. If your building was a 40,000 square foot area, and your legislation says, hey, get it down to a 7,000 square foot area, but that is a big open span and everybody can see where everybody is, then maybe you only need one zone. It really is more dependent upon how common sense-wise, you could have a 7,000 square foot area and every single one of them is a locked office. Well, in that scenario, you probably want to get it down to a more granular level than 7,000 square feet. And this is something, again, maybe even you could talk with your fire marshal or even contact the local PSAP to say, hey, what makes sense for getting these zones down? And again, in my opinion, it becomes more down to common sense. So now that you found out that, hey, my location granularity isn't enough. I do need to get this down to a more specific location information. How do I go about setting that up? Well, if you're in that medium risk category where you have all of your buildings and all of your sites within the same geographic area, you can do what's called setting up PSL. Within 911 ETC, we call this our Crisis Connect solution. And the way that it works for us is you have an E911 database with all your phone numbers and your location information. You set it up to send us a feed on a daily basis. We'll take that information and then upload it to the telco E911 data centers. And then any errors or problems with that data will actually come back to us, or we'll work through them on your behalf, so you don't have to become really E911 experts. Then when actually a 911 call takes place, it goes back to PBX and it goes out to your local trunks, your local PRI, and it'll go to what's called the selective tandem router, which is part of the E911 infrastructure. Based on the address information, it'll say, oh, this phone number is associated with this PSAP. We need to send this call off to this PSAP. And then once that call gets to the PSAP, they will see the caller ID of the person who dialed 911, and they'll say, oh, this phone number is located at this address based on the PSALI lookup. So this is the kind of the older school way of doing it. For a lot of organizations, this really isn't going to work unless you have all of your sites really in one geographic area. These are some of the potential error codes that we just like to show, and these are some of the things that 911 ETC works on behalf of our customers for. I always like to point out error code number 102 and number 104. Both of them say unknown error. Those are very, very innocuous descriptions to the errors. Just know there's an error, but we just don't even know what it is. And also, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands setting up traditional PSALI is actually something that organizations can do on their own. But there are some things that you want to consider if you wanted to do that. If you wanted to take it in-house, it just is a complicated and time-consuming implementation. Since 911 ETC has been doing this for a number of years, we make that a lot easier on the customer. You don't have to become E911 experts. And then also, you have to really dedicate a full-time person almost to doing E911. You have to understand it, make sure that the file is sent every single day, and then if that person were to leave, it would be possible employee turnover. How is that person going to be trained on figuring out E911 all over again? And then also the bottom line, again, going back to the possible liability risk for unresolved errors. People usually have different jobs within an organization, and if an error comes back, like we're talking about error code number 104 that says unknown error, will they be able to get to that error in a quickly, timely manner and be able to get it so that that information is up there correctly? So now that you have everything configured correctly, how can you actually be sure? Really, it's just actual testing to the public safety answer point. We have a lot of best practices that can help to make it so that those test calls go great, and they're scheduled with the public safety answer point. That's actually another service that 911 ETC can provide. If you're a customer of ours, we'll actually contact the local PSAP in your area and say, hey, when is a good time to test? And coordinate that with you and the PSAP to say, this is a good time to test, and it's all set up ahead of time. Public safety answer points really don't just like it if you just test whenever you want. They really want it to be scheduled. So now you have high risk. High risk is, we go back to the flatten, consolidate, extend, soft phone users. Really, for every single customer, it's going to be a little bit different. And if you're unsure if you have the high risk, just give us a call, or there's a lot of other E911 vendors out there that can assist you and say, hey, this is what you may need, or this is what you might need to do, and we can really help you to evaluate and say, you're definitely going to need E911, and this is why. And I'll go over the way that 911 ETC solution works for the higher risk solution. We call this our Void Connect solution. But before this even happens, when you're talking about the IP mobility of phones, you need to set up what's called ELINs and ERLs. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of those terms before, but they're just terms that refer to ELIN. It stands for Emergency Location Identification Number. And what that is just a phone number that's outpost during 911 calls. Since phones can move whenever they want in an IP world, tracking specifically where each individual phone number is at and uploading that into a system is really very cumbersome and actually sometimes impossible if the users are allowed to move their phones on their own and not let anybody know. So there's really no way to know where a phone is at. And so setting up these ELIN and ERLs is really the way to combat that. So when somebody moves the phone from one building to another or from one floor to another, their phone number that they outpost during 911 calls is dynamically changed, either via discovery software, or a lot of times even the PBXs themselves are able to do that discovery. And again, this is the purpose of tracking those phones so people know where they're at and get the right location information to the 911 operator. So with this solution, our Void Connect solution, it can cover on-campus people, remote offices, home offices, and soft phone users. And The difference between this solution and our previous solution is this is really not something that a customer can do on their own, because we're actually going to be dynamically routing the call rather than just doing database management. So you have the phones connected back to your call server PBX, and again, this is really PBX agnostic. It doesn't matter what type of a PBX the customer has. We can take calls from anywhere. You just need to give us, again, like I said before, send us a list of either all your phone numbers or a list of that ELIN URL information. And then the other thing that needs to happen is that IP discovery, tracking of those phones when they move. So you have a phone here, they call 911. They send out the ELIN value. Again, it's not the phone number of the person who's dialing 911. They send out the ELIN out value that goes to PBX, and then it gets pushed to 911 ETC in one of two ways, either via a SIP trunk or via a PSTN access phone number that 911 ETC will provide you with. Call comes to our voice positioning server, and based on the location information that is attached to that phone number, we say, oh, this is serviced by this selective tandem router. We need to push that call onto the selective tandem router, and once it gets there, it'll say, oh, this call needs to be pushed onto this correct servicing PSAP. So the caller ID gets delivered to the PSAP. They do a data dip and say, oh, this phone number is located at this address, 987 Elm Avenue, 2nd floor, East Wing, Othertown, California 91790. And so that's how this is combated. And this is the nice thing about the solution, like I said, is it can be used for not only the on-campus phones, but also for remote offices that are outside of the same geographic area that the main site is and where those main trunks are. So these remote offices could be, the main site could be in Los Angeles, California, but these remote offices, they could be in Dallas, Texas, New York, even into Canada. And if somebody dials 911, that caller ID again comes to us either via that PSTN access phone number or the SIP trunk, push it all the way onto the PSAP, and then again that screen pop comes up with the correct location information of where that call is coming from. So it does look like we do have a few questions, but I did want to just let you know that there are some upcoming webinars. This is just the first in the series of webinars. We also have one coming up July 14th and August 12th. But we wanted this to be really quick and just to kind of give you a little bit of background on, do you really need E911? And in some cases, E911 may not even be necessary. In some cases, customers may be able to do it on their own. And in other scenarios, you may need to get an E911 vendor involved, like 911 ETC, to make sure that you have a solution in place to be able to route those calls to the correct public safety answer point. So I'm going to check and see if there's some questions here. I'm actually going to bring Mike Anderson back in on the call and see if he can help me with some of these questions. So I have a question here. Let's see here. It says, what are the risks of contacting a PSAP directly by dialing 911? Can the caller immediately identify the call as being a test call? And Mike, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, sure. No, actually, they wouldn't know. I mean, you'd tell them it's a test call, but they generally frown upon that depending on where you're at. Like in New York City, they like it to be scheduled in basically the middle of the night. There are only certain hours that they like you to do that. So just depending on the region. Some regions, they don't care at all if you just randomly call them and test, but that's more of a rarity now moving forward. More and more PSAPs we're finding like to have a time scheduled so they're aware that this is going to be taking place. So that's always the best practice, is to at least reach out to them, call them on their administrative line, which can be easily found, but that's something, like Kevin said, we do help our customers with, and then you just call them, tell them what you're doing, and tell them, ask them when the best time is to schedule some test calls.
Okay. We have another question here. This is when I was going over a slide earlier, I think this question came up. Would that require each individual extension to have a DID associated with it? And I guess that's going back to voice over IP. And Mike, did you want to address that question, please?
Yeah, not necessarily. It depends on the PBX type. In some cases, you can actually send out what we call an ELIN, which is basically a phone number that correlates to an area or a zone. Or some older PBXs, you can actually send out the nearest DID to that phone. So it really depends on what kind of PBX platform you have, but most of the newer generation PBXs allow you to assign a unique phone number to an area. So let's just say a floor, and you could have 50 phones on that floor, but if any of those 50 phones dials 911, it's always going to spit out an ELIN, or the phone number that correlates to that floor at that address. So like I said, depending on the PBX type, you can generally do that where you set up zones, and you don't have to associate a particular DID to every single phone. In fact, we've found that most PSAPs now, when we first started doing it, when I first started doing it 13 years ago, we would give information such as, the building, the floor, room, or cubicle. And we're finding now that after talking to more and more like PSAP operators or managers that information really is not that relevant to them. They don't care about a cube number because they don't really know what that means generally. What they really want is the address, the building, if there's multiple buildings of that address, the floor, and in some cases, if the floor is really large, breaking that out into quadrants like northwest, southwest, southeast, northeast.
Great, Mike. And actually, there's a follow-up comment to that from the same question. This is a legacy PBX, a non-IP capable.
Non-IP, yeah, but even in some old legacy PBXs, it depends. I mean, I'm just speaking like, well, there's some older like Avaya systems where there's an ELE field that you can populate that stands for the emergency location extension. Even on a TDM phone, if you plug in an ELIN on the station form, let's say you move a phone to the third floor and there's an ELIN assigned to that third floor, you can assign that TDM phone an ELIN that correlates to that third floor in the ELE field on CM. So it can be done. If we're talking really older PBXs, there are some other workarounds. I don't want to waste everybody's time, but there are some other ways of accomplishing this as well. So you can always reach out to Kevin or myself or just go to our website and be happy to talk to you about that further, but that's a lengthy discussion.
And then there's a question, do you have a written description of one that you provide? By written, I mean not in the PowerPoint. And yes, we can definitely get you, Harry, there's a question from Harry Gordon, we can definitely get you a written description of what E911 is so that, a lot of times taking this to management, sometimes it's a little bit hard to explain, so we can definitely get you a written description. And then there's another question. I have 9 sites all across the country. All of them have local trunks. Do I need E911? Well, I guess that's probably more of a question. Well, go ahead, Mike. Why don't you answer that?
I was just going to say, you said it's a common sense thing. Obviously those local trunks will allow emergency responders to get to your address, and that's all we'll give them right now. Now, if you have multiple buildings of that address or multiple floors, then, as Kevin said with the risk assessment, like looking at your risk, well, how quickly would someone find somebody, if they're collapsed at their desk, if they showed up to that address? And also have to take into account the legislation in whatever states you're located in. So you might have to do it, even though you might not feel it's necessary. But like Kevin said, it's a common sense thing. If you collapsed, dialed 9, or if you dialed 911 collapsed, how quickly would they find you, and would that be acceptable to you if you were dialing 911?
And there's also a question, how can I get a copy of the presentation? We're actually recording this webinar, and you'll be able to download this. If you want the slides specifically, I have our email addresses up here on the screen. Just email either myself or Mike Anderson, and we can get you an actual copy of the PowerPoint presentation. And there's another question, is there a list of legislation by state? Yes, actually, if you go to 911etc.com/legislation, you can actually pull up the list of all the states, and you can actually click on a link within our website to be able to look at the specific legislation for each state. I'm actually I can pull it up here right now so everybody can kind of take a look at it, but this is what the legislation page looks like on our website. And then we have a little brief synopsis of what the legislation entails. And if you click on one of these links, it'll actually redirect you to the specific legislation or just get you a link to the legislation document in PDF format. Okay, here's a question about soft phones. Is there laws prohibiting users to not be able to use their soft phone to dial 911? I personally haven't heard of specific legislation saying that that can't be done. I know that there are some states that say that you need to allow 911 calls if you're using a device. So, Mike, have you heard specifically for soft phones? I believe that might just fall under, in general, being able to allow users to dial 911.
Yeah, there's nothing specific to soft phones, but if you're giving your employee the ability to use that phone, that device, it's still your responsibility to ensure if they dial 911 that they're going to get some assistance. So, you know, earlier on in my career doing this, a lot of customers would slap stickers on it or make people sign something saying that they're aware that if they dial 911 that it might not go to the right PSAP. But we're seeing more and more customers with the technology advances and ability now to actually allow users to provision their own location on a soft phone. More and more of our customers are deploying this out to their field, their workers that are working from home or soft phone users as well.
Great, thanks, Mike. And unless there are any other questions, I think we can wrap the webinar up with about 3 or 4 minutes to spare here. So I'll just wait for another minute here, maybe, and before we wrap things up. Again, like I said earlier, there will be a link to download this webinar if you would like a recording of it. And then also just please email either Mike or myself with the request if you would like the actual PowerPoint presentation sent to you. So with that, I think we can wrap it up. Thanks again, Mike, for jumping on and running this. If there are any other questions, feel free to email myself or Mike Anderson. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you at the next webinar.